budget session of Parliament ended today with an adjournment and will be known as the least productive session since 18 years. As we head towards general elections, Parliament has routinely become a platform for political parties to air their agendas. But should this agenda overtake the core function of Parliament to this extent? For example, a finance bill that is passed in 18 minutes. Grants to various departments passed without discussion. Several no-confidence motions which were drowned in shouting matches. This at a time when the banking system in the country is in serious trouble, when farmer protests are rising, and when protests against a Supreme Court order on the SC/ST Act saw violence in some parts of the country. So does it really matter at the end of the day if some MPs say they won't take their salaries for a few days of Parliament session? Does it really matter when they say that this should not happen and point fingers at each other? Because at the end of the day, the joke is on us. To speak more on this, I'm joined now by KTS Tulsi. He is a member of Parliament in the Rajya Sabha from the Congress Party and, of course, senior advocate at the Supreme Court. I'm also joined by Nivedita Rao, who is an analyst at PRS Legislative Research. Thank you so much for joining us on the show. To both of you, Ms. Rao, PRS has put out very detailed statistics about this budget session that has just gone by. It was, of course, in two parts. In a snapshot, would it be safe to say that it has been the least productive and the most disappointing in the longest time?
Right. So the budget session has to be viewed in terms of the two parts that have happened, with the recess interrupting the sort of two parts. Now, the first part, relatively speaking, has been a lot more productive than the second half, which came to a close today. But the second half saw a productivity of about 4% in Lok Sabha and about 9% in Rajya Sabha, which indeed has been one of the lowest since 2000. Now, even the 9% productivity in Rajya Sabha, if you were to do away with the time spent on the oath-taking of new members entering Rajya Sabha or the farewell speeches of the outgoing members, then this number could actually even fall further. But in terms of what the nature of the business was supposed to be conducted in the session itself, one could view it in terms of three buckets when it comes to the budget session. The first is the financial business, there is the legislative business, and there is the non-legislative business. And because of the disruptions that we've seen in the budget session, especially in the second half, there have been big hits to productivity in terms of all of these three components, whether it's the financial business, the legislative business, or the non-legislative business. If I were to elaborate in terms of the financial business itself, like you said, the finance bill was passed in about 18 minutes. And this particular bill has seen discussions to the tune of about 10 to 12 hours previously. In fact, just last year, it took about 10 hours for the finance bill to get passed. Another component is that about 6 demands for grants were listed for discussion, which included ministries of health and railways,
No, and in fact,
which
Nivedita,
were never discussed despite being scheduled.
We've put out some of those statistics as well from PRS, and they all point to that one big picture that not much work happened. Now, Mr. Tulsi, you are a veteran parliamentarian. How do you look at it? Because today you've had the BJP say that their MPs will not take cuts, will not take their salaries for the 23 days that were washed out. They've, of course, blamed the Congress and other opposition parties. At the end of the day, wouldn't you agree that the real loser is the Aam Aadmi, who voted people in, who voted these members into the Lok Sabha, and of course Rajya Sabha members like yourself were nominated? But how is it fair to us that no real work got done?
See, I'm very sad that this is how the entire session turned out to be. I believe that in the Westminster, there has not been once even a case of disruption of the House of Commons for the last over 100 years. And that's the model that we have adopted for ourselves, but who corrupted the whole system. You see, if I may, the obstruction, the art of obstruction was invented perhaps by Mr. Arun Jaitley. On 30th January 2011, he said in the House, and it's recorded, obstruction of parliament is in favor of democracy. And they washed out so many sessions, not one. On 26 August 2012, he said, obstruction in parliament brings greater benefits to the country. Again, Mr. Arun Jaitley, on 28 August 2012 said, obstruction is a legitimate tactic for the opposition to expose the government. And this is how they justified when one after the other various sessions were washed out. Mrs. Sushma Swaraj said, as leader of opposition in the Lok Sabha, on 7 September 2012, not allowing parliament to function is a form of democracy. I don't know which one, not Westminster.
Okay, no, you know.
Then why the debate is not taking place? Mr. Arun Jaitley said on 22nd August 2012, we are not interested in debate. What is there to debate? And this is when parliamentary democracy is known to be the government by debate.
No, there's undoubtedly, Mr. Tulsi, there is, no one party that has allowed Parliament to function. Every party in opposition seems to play a similar rule. You are right. When the UPA was in power, the BJP did often disrupt Parliament. You are now doing the same. Before we move forward, I just want to play out what BJP MPs said today. They had a protest outside Parliament against disruptions and the entire budget session which was washed out.
दूसरे चरण का सत्र नहीं चला, उसका एक ही कारण है, कांग्रेस पार्टी और कांग्रेस पार्टी के नेतृत्व का लोकतंत्र खिलाफ के रवैया, नकारात्मक राजनीति और जनादेश के बारे में असहिष्णुता.
The people of this country, the voter of this country, the manner in which they sent us to this, they elected us and sent us to this temple of democracy to discuss their issues, to dispose of important business in the interest of the people of this country, that has gone a waste. I think it's also an occasion for all of us to admit that we have failed in living up to the expectations of the voter.
हमारी देश की लोकतंत्र जो है, जिसको दुनिया भर में माना जाता है, उसको रोकना है. और पूरे सत्र में हम लोगों ने इस विषय पे प्रक्रिया जो है अपनाई है. जो भी सही तरीके से कायदे कानून से करना था हमने किया है, लेकिन विपक्ष ने हमें साथ नहीं दिया और विपक्ष ने लोकतंत्र की हत्या की है.
Okay, so unsurprisingly, the BJP says it's the Congress's fault, the Congress says it's the BJP's fault. Mr. KTS Tulsi, look at it from the broader picture, and because you have seen what has happened inside this entire session, that's why I want to ask you that is there no way that some work could have been done? And it's quite telling that literally one of the few bills that got passed without any objection, including one of them, was that regulated salaries and salary increases for MPs. What does that tell the people?
You see, I believe that the way out is that the Prime Minister calls an all-party meeting, and in that all-party meeting, they agree on the manner in which this business can be suspended for debating an urgent issue which has arisen. It's all there in the rules. But the government of the day must also express a regret for having stalled the parliament for 3 years. At that time, they didn't let any business take place. All parties must swear that they will not now disrupt parliament. This happens in the United States, in other countries. There are countries where there are lots of disruptions. But in the civilized democracies, you are supposed to debate, air your argument, persuade the other side. And for that purpose, it is necessary that there should be an even-handed dispensation. And if somebody wants to raise an issue of importance, the issue is raised. Why should the government try to run away and then have its own allies to disrupt the parliament so that the bank dacoity can't be debated?
Okay, so let's look at two key points that happened in this session, Nivedita. One, of course, we've spoken about is the finance bill being passed in 18 minutes. The other is a series of no confidence motions that were moved but were not taken up because there was too much noise in the House. Now, could you give us details of this that PRS has put together with data, and also juxtapose this, because the question is that if the finance bill could have been passed amidst a din, why were the no confidence motions not taken forward?
Right. So the no confidence motion was proposed by across different opposition parties, and the rules and procedures are very clear in terms of how it can be put to test, the government being put to test on the floor of the House. And this has happened previously. I believe about 26 times previously that the motion has been put to test. And this is, of course, enshrined in our constitution, where the government is accountable in the parliament when it comes to restoring confidence in the government. Now, going a step further, in this particular session, the Speaker noted that the disruptions were extremely high for her to take a head count of the number of members who have proposed this particular motion. Having said that, the Speaker has enough powers to address that kind of disruption and to make the counting happen in order to test that particular motion. And this basically also takes me back to an incident where about, I think, 25 Congress MPs were once marshalled out of the Lok Sabha because of an intense level of disruption. So there are certain extreme steps which also exist at the disposal of the Speaker if it comes to disruptions which cannot be controlled at the floor of the House. So that would be perhaps one of the extreme steps that do exist at the Speaker's disposal. Hence, the powers do rest with the Speaker in order to test this particular motion.
So that clearly didn't happen. That no confidence motion has been left as it was, though it wouldn't have really, put any challenge to the government. It has the numbers, but it would have given way to debate on the floor of the House. Mr. Tulsi, in terms of the perception battle after the session has finished, the BJP has come out and said that its MPs would not be taking a salary for the 23 days that the session was washed out. It has given them a higher moral ground, you would agree, and shouldn't the Congress party make the same offer?
Well, I don't know. The Treasury members may be disturbed by pangs of guilt that it was for them to ensure that their allies will continue to disrupt the House each day, and they realized that they were the real ones behind the disruptions. Opposition was crying hoarse. The rules are the accountability of the government to the House, to the lower house, is the most vital part of parliamentary democracy. All business is suspended when the no confidence motion is received, and the Speaker will not have any other business listed until the no confidence motion has been debated. And over here, we just don't care about the rules, both sides. We don't care about the conventions. How is the parliamentary system going to work if no confidence motion is going to be shoved into the carpet? The budget can be passed. If the budget can be passed, why can't the no confidence motion be debated?
Are
they worried about?
No, sure. The no confidence motion in itself was a very peculiar situation because you had a host of opposition parties which kept saying that they were moving no confidence motions. The Congress, of course, backed it. Clearly, there was more than adequate numbers that were required, which is 50 MPs. And yet, day on day, there was disruption. My question to you, Mr. Tulsi, is this also reflective of the kind of opposition unity there is and what the Congress position is in the House, that the fact is, as the largest opposition party, the Congress failed in getting enough people together and ensuring that the no confidence motion is at least heard?
the parliamentary system works on certain conventions. And in this case, the proceedings are recorded. We can all see who was causing disruption. It was the allies of the government. From the beginning to the end, each day, in and day out, it was the allies of the government. Was the government worried about certain other allies who are not happy with the situation? Government obviously must be having some good reason for not to allow the no confidence motion to be debated. And that is why they would live with the lesser evil of disruption and disrepute, bringing the entire parliamentary system into disrepute.
That is a fair point, that the entire parliamentary system is in disrepute, and which is why, Nivedita, I want you to explain to us why this is so important. Because there is always a lot of commentary after every parliament session that it was a washout, it was a waste, bills were not taken up. But for people to really understand that why the functioning of parliament is so key and what we have truly lost in this session, can you put that into perspective?
Sure. I think in terms of disruptions of this particular session, I think one can view it in terms of the monetary loss and I think the non-monetary loss as well. The monetary loss being the budget of rupees 24 lakh crores, which got passed without any substantial discussion. In fact, the demand for grants which were supposed to be discussed, zero, none of them were discussed as scheduled. The other important and larger, I think, effect of these disruptions and the complete washout was the fact that there were many bills which were listed for consideration and passage, which is the legislative agenda that the government had set out to fulfill. And these included bills like the National Medical Commission Bill or the FRDI Bill. Now, the implications of the National Medical Commission Bill are such that it affects the regulatory space when it comes to medical education and practice. And these are very broad, sweeping sort of changes and regulatory moves which were envisaged under these legislations. So the intangible costs of the lack of consideration and the lack of debate on these kind of key legislations is also another big cost that perhaps misses the math, but is also one of the bigger the sort of ramifications that need to be taken into consideration.
Well, I hope that our elected representatives are taking these into consideration and we don't see a repeat of this entire cycle as we get closer and closer to the next general elections. Politics has its place and it has ample airing and a platform outside Parliament as well. Perhaps that is one space when differences can be put aside to just get some work done. Thank you so much, Nivedita Rao and KTS Tulsi, for joining in that discussion today.